In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by it. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kid got a kick back and here like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm...
Yo, what's good, Time Clan? It is your boy King Ty next here, back with another video, and today I have a question for you all. Have you all ever heard of the nature versus nurture debate? If you haven't, I'll just sum it up for you. Basically, all you need to know is that there's this question about the nature of a person, about how a person acts. Is the way the person acts because of their nature, that's just the way they were born? Or is it because of the way that they were raised? Isn't that their environment was the one to really shape the person that they ended up becoming? This is what we'll be tackling throughout this What If. You see, in this world, Zuko Midoriya, he ended up awakening his quirk when he was around 4 years old. He was a bit of a late bloomer. It wasn't necessarily that he ended up getting his quirk the very day he became 4 years old, but around 8 months later, I would say, right when they were starting to lose hope. He was hugging his mother after another day of coming home with burn marks all across his body. He had tried hugging her, but when he was going to wrap his arms around her, a tingling feeling ended up coming out of his knuckles, around his knuckle area. And the very next thing he knew, well, when he opened his eyes, at the very least, you could say that he saw something unexpected, something traumatizing. He would see that his mother was bleeding, and he would look at where the origin of this bleeding was from. He would see these weird bone claws sticking out of his arms. He noticeably was frightened. He was immediately scared. He didn't know what was going on. He was so scared that when he looked at his mother's face, all he could see was just shame, horror, fear in her eyes. She was coughing up blood as well. He didn't know what to do in this situation. He was only 4 years old after all. Next thing you know, he would end up running away. He was so scared of his own quirk. He was scared of what he could do. After all, he had just killed his mother. He would run out to the apartment, run out of the whole complex, the whole building, the whole area that he was in. He would run into the woods and he would end up blacking out. It was raining after all, and he trembled while he was running through the woods. He was thinking that somebody would find out about him and try to arrest him or something along those lines. Some bad people would try to get their hands on him, knowing that he was the reason for why his mother was in such a state right now. But when he tripped, he immediately blacked out. He would end up getting discovered by one of All For One's henchmen, though. He would end up waking up in this sort of green test tube. Whatever liquid he was floating in, it was seemingly green, or at least had this green tint to it. The light was green, and when he was looking around, everything was kind of dark as well. He would look directly to some scientists, or at least some shadowy figures. That's what he was able to see at the time. some shadowy figures, some silhouettes of people monitoring him, taking notes. He didn't know what was going on, but what was really happening was that they were taking notes on his behavior, taking notes on his quirk. They were seemingly doing some sort of research on him. He didn't know this at the time, though. He didn't know what sort of situation he had gotten himself into. But these scientists were really intrigued with him, at the very least, that you could say. They were so interested in him that they were so interested in Izuku that they would end up reporting this information to the head honcho, All For One himself. They would inform All For One about his quirk, all the abilities of his quirk. It seemed that Izuku seemed to have some form of bone claws and a healing factor. Not the very greatest quirk of all time or anything, but the healing factor, and those bone claws could serve some use to All For One. All For One is interested in the healing factor, especially here. Sure, anybody could have bone claws. It was a step up above the regular quirks, the more average quirks of civilians. But it wasn't something that he would really think about taking for himself. Even with the healing factor, well, it wasn't every day that he would be able to find somebody who had a healing factor and bone claws at the same time. Some sort of dual quirk, some sort of quirk that had two functions. He didn't quite understand it, but he decided to accept it. He figured that this was just another source of, well, the generations getting stronger, these quirks getting stronger by each generation. And that's what was going through All For One's head. But he figured that he could have some use of this kid. He didn't know this kid's name, but he felt that he could actually train him if he actually lost his memory, or if he had or if he didn't have any sort of, if he didn't still have any sort of memory, he could still manipulate him. No matter what, he could find some use for this kid. And for the next 10 years, he would actually be raising Izuku. He would actually be raising him up to become a sort of killing machine. He figured that this would be a great experiment, something great for Shigaraki's development as well. He would remove any sense of morality within this kid's mind. He would make sure that this kid had no issues with killing anybody when needed to. He would make sure that he barely ever spoke as well. He would focus most of his conversations through action and action alone. Sure, he would still teach him speech because well, he already knew how to talk. It's more a matter of him just learning and developing his vocabulary. He would just figure that it would be useful from time to time for him to actually understand what other people are saying within a conversation, rather than him having to use incredibly simple words. And whenever he was giving Izuku an order, during this time, he would also feel that this kid needed a bit of an upgrade in his quirk. He would actually have Dr. Ujiko work with this, and Dr. Ujiko, he would have quite a bit of fun here. He would end up simply having Izuku go through this Weapon X program that he liked to dub it. He would like to dub this process. He would call this project Weapon X, and in this process he would put in a layer of metal. He would insert a layer of metal into Izuku's skin, down to his skeleton. This layer of metal would cover Izuku's skeleton all the way, enveloping all of his skeleton, and next thing you know, he would have another layer of he would have a whole layer of metal, which, while poisoning him to an extent, it also kept him from going completely savage, going completely ravenous or anything along those lines. It did mean that his healing factor would be a little watered down, but that wasn't too much of a big deal because his offensive abilities were increased here. He was able to take bullets. He was able to take punches from other people. People would actually feel hurt by trying to punch him due to the fact that they were practically punching metal thanks to this layer of adamantium covering Zuko's skeleton. This skeleton was now upgraded for Izuku every time that he unleashed his claws. Sure, it hurt every time that he popped those claws out, but that didn't mean they did not heal. Every time they would heal, every time that Izuku was given orders by All For One, he would make sure that he would obey them, or else he would suffer from shocks. All For One would have had a collar around Izuku for a while, trying to make sure that Izuku would get it through his head that he belonged to All For One, and whatever orders All For One gave him, he would obey it. Those 10 years, that decade of training, all of that hammering into his head, he would completely understand now. Completely understand what he is, who he belongs to, all of this. And he would be known by a different name as well. He would be known as Yamakumo Logan, or at least that would be his other alias. That would be his alias for UA. After all, when time was arriving for Izuku to become 14 years old, All For One figured that it would be a good time to think about enrolling him into school. Not just any school, but UA. UA for certain reasons. Mainly because of all of the heroes there, and he figured that it would be quite a call for them to be able to ruin UA's reputation. That would be the goal for All For One during this time, at the very least. By the time Izuku was 14 years old, he was the perfect killer. You could say he had already gone through several missions where he ended up killing his targets. He just did not have any emotion towards killing people. As a matter of fact, he acted more like a beast than a person. All For One didn't have any issues with this. He would only start to teach Izuku proper manners when he was 14 years old, just so that he would be able to fit more in with the crowd of his classes for UA when he gets there. He would have Izuku also really try and improve on his speech. Now he would be able to have full sentences. He would be able to say more than 5 words at a time, but that didn't necessarily mean he was incredibly comfortable with it. He would only ever say more than 5 words when he really needed to, or he really wanted to establish something. Something that All For One had no issues with. He had no qualms about this. But when it came on to getting into UA, of course, they would need to file in some paperwork. They would need to give some paperwork for Izuku. He would have 2 parents, 2 brainwashed parents, 2 people who had fallen for All For One's tricks, people who were indebted to All For One. And of course, with this all being taken into account, they would have no issues with registering Izuku into UA. This would be 2 months before the exam as well. They would have had all of the information filed out, and he would be sent to the entrance exams after those 2 months were up. He would have just been training during those times. While at the ceremony, he would have been on the more quiet side. He would have been keeping to himself for most of the duration. After all Izuku really cared about would be taking down these robots, destroying these robots within the vicinity. Ida wouldn't call out Izuku here, considering his more quiet nature here. He wouldn't be muttering or anything along those lines. During the physical exams, he would have been collecting quite a bit of villain points rather quickly. He would have basically gained some rescue points along the way too, but that was on accident. That was from accidentally, well, cutting down some of the robots that were basically a threat to some of the other contestants, these examinees, those that were on the weaker side, such as Moneta, those who couldn't really fend off against these robots. He didn't really notice people, but he was able to take down the robots, and in UA's eyes, they saw that he noticed them and would actually attack these robots to help them. That was why they ended up giving him some. They would end up actually giving him some, well, rescue points along the line. I would say that he got around 30 rescue points, I believe, would sound pretty good for this at least. And when it comes down to villain points, he would have gotten around. He would have gone around like 60, 70. We're going to say 60. He would have gone around 60 villain points, not because of the fact that he wasn't that impressive. It was mainly because of the fact that, unlike Bakugo, he wasn't a mid to long range fighter. He was more close combat, so it would take him longer to end up getting these villain points, but he was able to get them at a pretty fast record. He wouldn't save Uraraka here. He wouldn't have bothered trying to fight such a large robot. After all, he knew his capabilities, and that was a bit beyond what he was willing to try out. But it's not that Uraraka died here or anything along those lines. The robot would have actually stopped moving and shut down once it was about to approach Uraraka. The UA staff knew what they were doing by allowing this robot in the vicinity, into this exam. Many of the students still saw the teachers as crazy though. There would be no interaction between Uraraka and Izuku here, especially on the first day, because of the fact that there was no interaction during the entrance exam. They didn't meet up when Izuku was about to trip. They didn't meet up when Izuku tried to save Uraraka like in canon. He didn't even bother trying here. He was with the rest of the crowd back at the entrance exam. But that didn't really bother him too much. That didn't bother either one of them. As a matter of fact, when it came on to his interaction with Ida would also barely talk to Izuku here because, yeah, he would admit that Izuku had some pretty impressive speed and strength back there at the entrance exam. He would compliment him on that fact, but nothing beyond that. When that was then we would have, well, Aizawa Sensei. Aizawa would inform everyone to go outside. This reason being because they would be doing an apprehension exam. Aizawa would end up going over to Deku. The ball. I should mention here that, well, Whenever I say Deku, it's not necessarily that I'm saying that his name still is Deku here. I said it a little earlier, but he'll be going by the name Yamakumo Logan. It's just easier to say Deku. But Aizawa would hand the ball over to Deku or Yamakumo and say that he got first place. Since he got first place in the entrance exam, he would be the one throwing the ball first. Deku would just shrug and say, okay. And he would throw the ball around 900 meters, eclipsing most of the students' own, even when they tried to do it. This would impress most of the class, especially when they ended up hearing about him getting first place in the entrance exam. Bakugo, on the other hand, he would be jealous. He would find that he could probably do better, and he was angry at the fact that he wasn't the one to get first place in the entrance exam and knew who did now. So he would end up having to show this kid some dominance. He would have to show this kid who was boss. Aizawa would explain the purpose of this exam. The purpose of this exam would be to see how creative these students could be when using their quirks, and see if they could get some hero scores, you could say. After all, when it came on to the middle schools, they were acting pretty dumb, thinking that everybody would be equal. As a matter of fact, it was the exact opposite. There was never going to be equality when it came on to quirks. It was either that one person had a better quirk, or that they could use their quirk better than somebody else, or they had no quirk in general. And some people's lives were destined to never become heroes because they were dealt a bad hand when it came on to their genetics. People would start cheering though when they heard that they could use their quirks in this apprehension exam, thinking that, oh, this would be fun. But Aizawa would quickly shut this down, informing everyone that whoever got last place would get expelled. Izuku would race against Bakugo in the 50-meter dash, and they would actually tie. Izuku would crush the grip strength machine, getting a max score though. This would easily outdo Bakugo's score. I don't necessarily know what Bakugo's score is, but I would say I still have nothing for his score. Overall, Izuku would end up getting around 3rd or 4th place around this time. Mineta would actually get expelled from UA because of the fact that he was in 20th place. He would start crying, but Aizawa would say that that's what you get for looking at girls being distracted during the whole exam. Literally, the only thing that you did well was the sideways jumping thing. And even then, that was your only impressive feat. All the rest were subpar at best. Any sympathy that the girls would have had for Mineta was quickly shut down as well when they heard that he was a pervert, staring at these girls secretly throughout most of the exam rather than taking it seriously. The battle training arc. Well, this is where things would take a turn here. Things would take a turn because of the fact that Izuku would wear an outfit that was similar to that of Wolverine's X-Force outfit. Black and white or gray or something along those lines. I don't know. His would look very similar to that, although probably with slight differences from here to there. Maybe the sleeves were longer, and there was a tinge of more red, probably around the boots. But yeah, his outfit would look pretty similar to that. Many would comment on his outfit, some thought his outfit looked pretty cool, while others would say it looked kind of villainous. Some of the girls would be attracted to the skin-tight suit though, and seeing that he had a developed physique as well. All Might would select the teams here, and he would have it to where Izuku and Ochako Uraraka were on the same team, but they would be villains here. This is one change that would happen in this canon. Bakugo and Ida would also end up being the heroes here. Bakugo, knowing that Izuku managed to outdo him yesterday, would actually try to pursue him, try and assert his dominance here, because he wasn't really able to do it back at the, well, apprehension exam, because Izuku was able to just outdo him in most of the competition. Bakugo ended up getting like 750 meters, just like in canon in the apprehension exam. So not even there he could really outdo Izuku. If it wasn't that Izuku outdid him, it was that they would end up getting a tie, which just frustrated him. He would try to go after Izuku. Izuku would have it to where Ochako would be the one to protect the bomb though. He would be the one that would stall the heroes. He would fight Bakugo very aggressively though. As soon as they encountered each other, they would get into a fist fight of the sort. Bakugo would be trying to use his explosions, while Deku would be blocking these explosions and actually hitting him with his claws. He would end up stabbing the boy a couple of times in the shoulder, making sure to not hit any critical areas. All Might couldn't say for Deku to not use his quirk. After all, it's not his fault that his quirk is on the more piercing side, more on the, well, stabby side. But at the same time, he needed to mention that, hey, you may want to lay down on the stabbing because of the fact that, well, we don't want him to really start bleeding a whole bunch, don't we? Izuku would just shrug and say, yeah, I guess so, and he would end up hitting Bakugo with the blunt side of his claws, not necessarily the sharp part. He would headbutt him as well. He would kick him in the legs and the family jewels as well, causing Bakugo to reel over. He would fall head first, and Izuku would incapacitate Bakugo by kicking him in the liver. He would give a liver kick to Bakugo, and he would use some capture tape in order to really signify that, well, Bakugo was out of the running for this exam. Afterwards, Izuku would run to find Uraraka, fending off against Ida. Ida would be trying his best in order to really get to the bomb, but Uraraka was touching all of these different objects and throwing them back down at Ida, making sure that he wasn't able to get too close. He was at a distance, which was frustrating to say the very least. Izuku would just sneak up behind Ida and karate chop him, which would knock him out. Now, All Might would have given Izuku the MVP here, but he would mention that Izuku was a bit too violent when it came on to his dealing with Bakugo, and said that there would be no MVP in this situation. All the rest of the fights would be pretty similar. It's just that many of the students would have been kind of scared of Izuku. The only real change afterwards would be with Momo's fight because of the fact that she wouldn't have another here to help her out. I don't think he was of much help in the beginning either way. So she would have had to really test her skills against some of these other kids here by herself. Deku wouldn't be world class rep afterwards after his little stunt with Bakugo. And not much else really changes here. I mean, sure, you would have Ochaku trying to talk to him, but that's pretty much it. Even when it comes on to the fact that reporters were getting into UA, the fact that somebody had breached security, there wasn't much of a difference here because, simply put, that's it. And somebody was able to breach security, and so many of the students were running away, but
cafeteria.
either was the one to actually calm them down here still, so not much changes.
Would end up praising Ida for his works, and the teachers would start to get into an investigation about how UA ended up getting infiltrated. After all, they had some of the best security in the country, in the world, honestly. So there was no way that some measly reporter could get inside, because if that news reporter had such a powerful quirk in order to break in, they wouldn't be a news reporter. But that's besides the point. What's happening is that the very next day, they would end up having to go to the USJ. The USJ would be interesting because of the bus ride there. During the bus ride, Tsuyu would actually build up the guts to actually ask Yamakumo a question. What was his quirk? I mean, she'd seen him bust out these claws before, and he seemed to have like incredible strength as well. Speed as well. Speed on top of that. She was wondering what kind of quirk he had. So Yamakumo would explain in simple words this: bone claws, healing factor. That's literally what he ended up saying. And of course, Tsuyu was expecting more of an explanation, but she didn't really get that chance. In terms of who they were thinking were the strongest, it would be interesting because of the fact that they would say that Todoroki was the strongest. Well, in long range at the very least. Because what they've seen with Yamakumo's actions, this guy is not afraid to get his hands dirty. This guy can be quite the violent one, and they don't know how well Todoroki would fare in a close range battle against Yamakumo. In a long range battle, they would definitely give Todoroki the win. But close range, they believe that Yamakumo could give Todoroki a run for his money unless he showed something new. Once they do arrive to the USJ, 13 would end up going over the purpose of why they were here, going over the purpose of the rescue training that they were going to be partaking in. Well, while she was going over this explanation though, Kirishima would actually interrupt them by mentioning how it seems that they even brought in like some actors to be villains, only for Aizawa to raise an eye and look to where Kirishima was pointing at, and he would immediately go on guard because of the fact that the League of Villains would arrive. Well, they didn't know who these guys were actually. They just knew they were villains. They didn't necessarily know about the League of Villains up until then. But of course, it was a bit too late for their students because of the fact that once they arrived, the very first thing these guys would do is introduce themselves as the League of Villains and that they were here to kill All Might. On top of that, they would end up teleporting most of the students to different areas. Some of them would have the same locations as in canon, but thanks to a little birdie. This little birdie you should know already. They will have more information about the UA students and their quirks, which would allow them to have a better preparation, be able to come up with a better idea for where to teleport some other students. For example, Suyu wouldn't be in the flood zone in this canon. Instead, she would have been sent to the conflagration zone. Ida would be one of the few who wasn't teleported away, alongside Yamakumo, but he was fighting off some of these villains. He was caught up in a battle against some of these guys, trying to defend Aizawa Sensei. Aizawa would also mention that Ida was the fastest one here, so it would be best for him to run back to UA and report what was happening. Of course, Ida would try and argue against this, saying that he should stay here and help, but Aizawa would disagree, saying that if he really wanted to help right now, he should get to moving right now. He should get to going, leave the USJ, and get the teachers immediately. So Ida would leave to go back to the school campus and tell the heroes about the situation at the USJ. Sure, Kuroguri would actually try and stop Ida, but it wasn't very effective thanks to the fact that Kirishima and Bakugo were able to make their way back to the center alongside some of the other students who were able to actually stall Kuroguri, able to actually trap him for just a little bit of time, giving Ida just that little bit of leeway in order to escape the USJ. The heroes would arrive sometime later and arrest many of the villains, although Shigaraki and Kuroguri would be able to escape. Sure, All Might was the very first one to arrive, and he was able to also subdue many of the villains, but he was mainly caught up in the battle against the Nomu. But when he is done fighting them though, they would end up going to look around the USJ, gathering any other students that were trapped who couldn't necessarily make it out of their zone at the time, thanks to some villains being there. But when they arrived at the conflagration zone, let's just say they weren't in for a pretty sight because of the fact that Suyu was dead. All Might would end up beating himself up over the fact that he was reckless, that he wasted his time limit when he could have been at the USJ and prevented this. He had to be less reckless with his time limit now. He didn't want to have another death of one of his students. The sports festival would still continue, but many other students here would have a different attitude. They weren't all so willy-nilly about the USJ. Sure, they fought some villains, but at what cost? They literally lost one of their classmates already. they weren't expecting being heroes would be easy, but they weren't expecting to suffer casualties so early in the game. They were still in high school, for crying out loud. A crowd would form around Class 1A's store, and Bakugo would mention how they were just here to scout out the competition. He would push them aside, and some would mention that he had some arrogance alongside the rest of Class 1A. This would irk Yamakumo because of the fact that they were trying to belittle Class 1A, belittle Class 1A without even knowing the full context of their situation. He would walk up to the crowd, and for the first time, at least while he was at UA, for the first time, Yamakumo would say more than 5 words, which would surprise many of Class 1A, who thought he was practically incapable of doing so. Honestly, you guys disgust me. One of our classmates died back there at the USJ, and you think we're arrogant. Honestly, you don't deserve to even be part of UA with that mindset. Now, get out of my way, maggots. Deku would end up forcing his way through the now silent crowd. All of his classmates were just shocked. They were in awe at the amount of words he just used, and it was so touching as well. He was right in every word he said. They didn't even know he was capable of doing this. They just thought he was a bit of a brute, but no. It seemed that he just used his words sparingly. Interesting. At this sports festival, Todoroki would end up declaring that he would defeat Yamakumo with only half of his power. But our boy Yamakumo Logan, otherwise known as Deku or Izuku Midoriya, he would just laugh in Todoroki's face. He would laugh in the heterochromatic boy's face so hard that he would end up needing to put his hand on the boy's shoulder for a sense of support. Todoroki would just shrug him off before, well, Yamakumo would end up getting himself back together, getting himself back to structure. He would just look at Todoroki and say, "Don't fail on your bub." When Yamakumo was brought up to the podium in order to give his speech, he would only say a couple of words, just like he usually would. Do your best or leave. That's basically all he said, which would kind of arouse the crowd. Some of them would be like, "He's speaking facts. A simple man, simple words, but gets the point across. I respect that. Doesn't come off as too arrogant or anything." Others would be like, you could have said at least a little more. Jeez, that's a bit too simple. They would be sure to make sure that he would end up losing in the first part, just to teach him a lesson. They also remembered what he said back there while they were huddled up around Class 1A's store that day. They were going to teach all of Class 1A a lesson, especially it would be some sort of mindset, especially in people like Monomo's mind. throughout the obstacle course, Azuku would just obliterate the competition. He would end up breaking out of Todoroki's ice easily and quickly take the lead. He was running so fast that he was even able to catch up to the heterochromatic boy and even surpass him, before using his agility to actually slice through some of these robots, being able to make even more obstacles for many other students. He would disregard their safety, as he would just slice through these robots like they were butter. Like a 9,000 degree knife, and you're going to cut butter with it. That's how it was for Yamakumo. The tightrope, it would slow him down a little because he would have to be leaping around the pillars, which, thanks to his agility though, it wasn't that big of an issue, and he could always just climb himself back up as well using his claws. But he didn't have to worry, because he was able to make it to the minefields without falling or at the very least having any issues of balance. When it came onto the minefield though, this is interesting due to the fact that he does have this exoskeleton, which gives him like 100 more pounds of weight. So he's like 200 something pounds. So with this weight, he would be able to just walk through the minefields without worrying about being blown away. He would charge through them, and he would just have the minefields constantly go off, but it didn't really matter due to the fact that he was not going to get blown away because of the weight of his exoskeleton, and he would end up getting first place. The cavalry battle, Deku would be the one to approach Ochako first here. He would also get Ida for his speed. Mei would offer to join the team, and she would offer the usage of her gadgets. Yamakumo would look at these gadgets and think before accepting her into his team, because he did see that there could be some use for those gadgets of hers. Todoroki, now that he didn't have Ida as somebody to select, he would go with the next best thing, Tokuyami. A bit of a switch here. He would sacrifice speed for... He would end up sacrificing his speed that he would have in Ida for a better reach, for more range, you could say, thanks to how Dark Shadow works. Almost none of Class 1A would be willing to go up against Yamakumo, considering just how fearless he was, just how powerful this guy was. He was not afraid to get his hands dirty. He was not afraid to give you a quick stab if he needed to. And some students would end up experiencing this as well. Bakugo, he was one of the few that wouldn't be exceptionally afraid of going up against Yamakumo. When it comes on to Yamakumo, he would also have to face Todoroki. Todoroki would try to get the 10 million headband for the whole duration of the cavalry battle. Bakugo would come in around like the last 2 to 3 minutes, but both of them would fail in the end. So it's pretty much everything for the ranks would be pretty similar to in canon, except that everybody is brought down one peg. So yeah, it's basically like Bakugo and Todoroki in second and third place, while Shinso's team would be in fourth place. Many others would look at this and be pretty impressed. This guy managed to keep his 10 million headband throughout the whole cavalry battle. And now we get on to the tournaments. Yamakumo would be given the same warning about Shinso from Ojiro. And yes, he did end up dropping out of the tournament because the same reason as in canon, he did not remember anything about the whole cavalry battle besides talking to Shinso, and he did not feel any honor and going to the next round without really remembering anything that he did himself. It just felt wrong in his book. Now, here's the thing. Yamakumo barely speaks already, and Shinso would not be too aware of this. He would try to actually provoke Yamakumo, but this man has been trained in his emotions for years now, and he would not fall for Shinso's tricks. Instead, Yamakumo would end up just charging in and ramming Shinso off the stage. Shinso would be left with some hatred towards Yamakumo here, especially considering the fact the boy didn't even use his quirk. Not that it was even all that impressive in the first place. I mean, yeah, it can cut through things, but what else? That's pretty much all he really knew about this boy's quirk so far. He was severely mistaken though. That wasn't the only thing about his quirk that made him special. Now, back to Yamakumo though. Yamakumo would be prepping himself for the next match, which would be against Todoroki. He would have watched all of the other fights and be entertained, to say the least. While he was on his way to the arena for his match, he would actually encounter Endeavor. Endeavor would see him and a bit of an interest would catch his eye. Enji would tell Yamakumo to get his son to use his flames and show the true strength of the Todoroki bloodline. Yamakumo would just look Endeavor dead in the eye and say, "No, not for you." Endeavor would just look at Yamakumo and begin to grow curious. Before he's starting to glare his eye a little bit, he would start to kneel down and really get eye to eye. What was that? Yamakumo wouldn't say anything. Instead, he would just walk away without bothering to talk to the man any further. He would arrive to the arena and he would fight Todoroki. He would bust out his claws and break through the boy's ice easily, which would surprise Todoroki. He was not expecting for Yamakumo to genuinely be able to break through his ice like that. Honestly, he was expecting that this would be a one-sided battle, but no. He was a formidable opponent. Sure, he was able to break through his ice earlier in the obstacle race, but in that he only used like a thin layer of ice. not enough to really trap people for long, and he knew that this guy was on the stronger side, so he wasn't expecting much back there. But to see him literally breaking glaciers of ice, that was on a different level. Yamakuma would end up clawing through this ice, breaking through this ice, all of these barrages of ice, and he would be stepping forward at the same time. He wouldn't just be standing still. No, instead he would be getting closer and closer to Todoroki until he was close enough to see the frostbite on the boy and realize that he was slowing down. He would start to suffer from the drawbacks of his quake. This is not the same Izuku here. This is Yamakumo Logan. He would not just give any sort of motivation for Todoroki to use his fire. Instead, he would use this moment of weakness to grab the boy by the face and fling him out into the ring. The crowd would go wild seeing this and realize that this no-name kid managed to take down the prized child of the Todoroki household, the prized child of the second hero, the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Angie would go to a corner and belittle Shoto, bringing up how not using his flames cost him the sports festival. Todoroki wouldn't say anything though. This pain that he was feeling though, this would only cause the boy to become colder, much colder here. Against Ida, the blue-haired boy would end up suffering stab wounds around his shoulder and knee before being kicked out of the ring by Izuku. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ida. Now, ever since the battle training arc, Bakugo was kind of scared of Izuku's strength. He was kind of scared of how vicious he could be in the battle. He even put himself to shame, and he knew that he could be pretty brutal in a fight. He was willing to unleash his gauntlets back then, but no. Yamakuma was putting too much work on his half for Bakugo to even have the chance. Izuku's strength was scary, but Bakugo's indomitable will to be the very best, that's the only thing that was really driving him to still fight the boy, to still fight Yamakuma. It was a fight or flight situation for Bakugo, and he didn't do too well because he would just be running away. This was a flight situation for him. Now he would genuinely be trying to escape those claws, escape those very, very dangerous claws. He wouldn't be using his full power either. He wouldn't be using the full power of his explosions, at least offensively anyways. It would be a cat and mouse situation for Bakugo and Deku. Deku was a cat. He was trying to tag Bakugo while the explosive boy was trying to flee the boy's grasp, the claws. But eventually Bakugo would start to run out of steam, while Yamakuma was basically like a train, some sort of tractor, some machine. They weren't running out of any steam anytime soon. they weren't running on any sort of fumes. If they were, it was hard to notice, because they would end up grabbing Bakugo by the collar, using their claws, and they wouldn't use their claws for this next part, because it would probably kill the boy. But they would punch Bakugo in the jaw, then headbutt Bakugo, and kick him in the chest, which would have enough force to throw Bakugo off of the stage. All for one would just be watching the sports festival from his secret hideout and just be cheering for his creation. It would be a little something like this. That's my boy. Yeah, that's my boy. That's my little killing machine. Bakugo would have a concussion and wouldn't be able to stand with the rest here. Yamakumo would actually get a lot of hero offers here, considering how he got first place in literally every single part of the sports festival. And when it came on to hero names, he would name himself Wolverine. He would intern with Edshot here, meaning he wouldn't be at Hosu. The fact that he wasn't at Hosu City is an issue because, well, Ida. And even if he wasn't exactly friends with Ida or Todoroki here either. None of them were friends in the slightest, so Ida would end up dying to stain, tarnishing Yui's reputation. After all, 2 students from the hero course have already died within like the first semester? But while Yui was going through a lot of press, Deku would just constantly be going through his internship under Edshot, which would basically result in him being a bit more tolerant, being able to sneak up on people a little bit more, and they weren't really able to do much because of Yamakumo's more stubborn-like nature. But he would be more tolerant towards his classmates after this week of training. Edshot would have been trying to subdue Yamakumo for most of the internship anyways. It is what it is. With all the press that was going on, UA would end up creating a dorm system. They would end up creating a dorm system really early due to Ida's death, and press all other media and basically on UA's back and breathing on UA's back like or something along those lines. I don't even know if you guys can hear it. Now Shinso would be moved up to class 1A, considering the fact that there were like 3 vacant seats now. But in order to really prove his worth, though, in order to solidify this decision, they would end up having him participate in the final exams. He would have to prove his worth during the final exams. He didn't necessarily have to win or anything, but show that he was capable of being a hero. As for others, though, this is interesting due to the fact there aren't as many students here. And here's how things would work. This is pretty interesting. Okay, I don't know what I was trying to say. Basically, what ends up happening is that Deku would be partners with Todoroki here, because the main reason why Deku was partners with Bakugo in canon was because of their prior relationship, which does not exist in this canon. And when it comes on to who they would be facing, it would actually be Aizawa, in order to see like just how far Yamakumo and Todoroki would be able to get without using their quakes so much. As for Shinso, he would be with Zero against Midnight. Well, it was an easy win for Shinso because of the fact that he was able to end up using his quirk on Midnight, the Seductress, and they would be able to get out real quickly. They would be able to put these handcuffs on her. They would literally have her put the handcuffs on herself. As for Aizawa would try to erase Deku's healing factor, and he could not erase his claws though, because they were already out. He would still try and put a run for his money though. Try and put a run for Yamakumo's money.
Aizawa also thought that his strength came from his quirk, although he never really mentioned that when they were on the bus ride to the USJ, when he was explaining his quirk. He thought that he was probably either hiding it or he didn't really have any real reason to mention it back there at the very least, so they just figured that the strength was part of his quirk and that he wasn't this strong on base level. But this would be the time when Eraserhead would finally put two and two together. Things would finally start to click in his mind. This kid, his strength, it's still there. This strength is not from his quirk. He would try and punch Yamakumo only for his hand to hurt, which would also send him for a loop. In his mind, he would be wondering, what is this kid? Even when he tried to use his scarf, Yamakumo would just rip through it, shocking the man even further. No one was able to rip through his capturing, his, what do you call this thing again? No one was able to rip through his scarf, this capturing mechanism of his. Although, what ends up happening is that Yamakumo and Todoroki would end up passing. Todoroki for the fact that Yamakumo would be the one to actually make Aizawa blink, and by doing this gave Todoroki the time to actually use his eyesight and basically freeze Aizawa in place, which would give them the free opportunity to either leave or put handcuffs on him. They ended up putting handcuffs on Aizawa, which means they would pass. Shinso, I've already explained. I need to mention this one thing though. There was another interesting thing to mention. Two new students would be part of Class 1A. These students would be Kitty Pryde and Gambit. Don't worry, they won't be here for long. The main reason I'm doing this is because there's not really many other characters in UA that would be any real relevance. They weren't really. There was no mention of many other students that
were part of the UA who had tried getting into the hero course, or at the very least had strong quirks that weren't already part of one of these classes, Class 1A or Class 1B. Now, the mountain training guide. Oh jeez, this is going to be interesting. This is literally the worst hike. Now on the way, what ends up happening during the mountain training hike would simply be that Yamakumo and the others would be fighting through all of these dirt monsters. Although with the exclusion of Ida because he's dead, Manetta also because of the fact that he was expelled. And let's face it, these two new recruits into Class 1A, they weren't really going to be of any use. They weren't the strongest yet. And also Suyu was dead as well. There are three new students of Class 1A. They hadn't really gone through anything compared to the rest of Class 1A. They'd gone through villain fights and they had to basically go through the grievance of having two beloved classmates die, all because they were not there to help them at the time. This would just be disheartening for most of Class 1A, and they would end up having some bitterness towards these new classmates as well. They would end up getting to the mountain lodge a little later than in canon because of this. Aizawa would explain the next day that everyone would be training their quirks, training their quirks and the strength of them in order to fight against the villains and really improve their skills. They didn't want another death after all. Aizawa, using this little tidbit, would encourage most of Class 1A to work even harder than before. They would be much more determined here because they would have to agree that they didn't want to have another classmate die on them because of some villain attack. Speaking of, that happens, yeah, another villain attack would happen here because a little Brady told them about told the League of Villains about their plans. Oh yeah, and our buddy old pal, Stain is still on the loose because no one was able to save Ida here, and no one was able to really fight Stain here either. So guess what? He's on the loose. Congratulations. Kota dies to Muscular because of the fact that this character, this Yamokumo Logan character, he wouldn't be there to save Kota at all because he doesn't really care about the kid. He has nothing. He does not even remember his own mother. So of course he would not care about Kota and his experience. He did not even bother asking Mandalay about him. Many other students would die as well here. Those who did end up surviving would be deeply hurt. Now, there's another part to it as well. Bakugo and Tokiyami, they would end up being captured by the League of Villains. Yumakumo will also be captured. I use the word captured with air quotations here. Now, Shinso, Kota as in like the, no, not Kota, Koda. Man, forget it. You know what? That guy who can speak to animals, that guy. That guy, Shinso, and Ojiro, yeah, they all die here as well. There's absolutely no chance for Shinso here. He has little to no hero training here. He does not know how to fight at all. Ojiro would personally be decapitated by Wolverine with Spinner by his side. Spinner there to basically be a form of backup. He would basically be the scapegoat in case Yue would have any sort of suspicion. They would probably just put the blame on. They would probably put the blame on Spinner, and they would easily be able to get away with it, considering the fact that this guy has like 100 swords or like 100 blades on him when he was fighting these guys. Now, of course, the remaining villains who weren't captured, they would end up getting teleported away. They would end up going back to the hideout. That includes Mystic and Press, who would release Bakugo, Tokoyami, and Yamakumo, and where they would be trying to get Bakugo and Tokoyami to join them. But those two would refuse. The only one that wasn't tied up would be Yamakumo, which both Tokoyami and Bakugo would be confused about. And this would be the time when we would reveal that Yumakumo was actually a spy. He was actually working for the League of Villains all along. And with this reveal, he would show them why they would probably want to work for the League of Villains now. He would stab his claws through Bakugo's heart, effectively killing him here. Tokoyami would be shocked at this revelation, even more shocked when he killed Bakugo and asked, how could you? Only for him to just smile creepily at Tokoyami. Izuku would just be tied up and beaten up just enough to not give off any suspicion when the heroes arrive, though. Tokoyami would be knocked out unconscious, and Bakugo's bleeding body would be brought to a different area, just so that they wouldn't mess with the tiles. They wouldn't have to clean up this area as much with Bakugo's bleeding out body. When the heroes did arrive, they would end up seeing the sorry states of Logan and Tokoyami that they were here to rescue alongside Bakugo, but we already know what happened to him. The League, alongside Yumakumo and Tokoyami, they would be sent to a different area though. Even when All Might was just literally inches away from grabbing Yumakumo and Tokoyami, he would scream, he would yell, he would be infuriated. But when they did end up finding their new location, what ends up happening is that Yumakumo would be fighting, once again, air quotations, other villains, but Tokoyami, he would now know that it's an act. He would be fighting villains as well. he will be fighting villains as well, trying to find a way out. But there was little to no way. Sure, there would be some sort of rescue squad, but it would not be nearly as effective here. All Might would be heavily distracted throughout the fight with All For One, especially after two reveals. Number one, Bakugo is dead. They killed Bakugo. That's why they could not find Bakugo's body. Well, they could, but there would really be no point at this point. And Shigaraki, he was a grandson of Nana Shimaru, All Might's master, the one who gave him One For All in the first place. These two revelations would leave All Might open to be attacked with an all-out attack or, well, move, like a very, very incredibly strong stacked on move from All For One, which held enough strength to actually blow a hole through the symbol of Peace's chest. All Might was dead here. With this done, the heroes would still succeed in retrieving the students, but with the rest of the villains though, the Nomu, they were just too plentiful. They were the ones giving the heroes the most trouble. They were able to take down many of the Nomu, but when it came on to the actual villains, the actual threats here, that's a different story. They weren't able to really get a lot of them. Now, that just means that the League was still free to make their moves. And as for Yamakumo, he would be pulled out of Class 1A quite conveniently after All Might's death. And after all of these deaths that has happened within Class 1A, that would just scar them permanently. The teachers would just come to the decision to fuse Class 1A and B in hopes of helping Class 1A recover, and the deaths, they were just too plentiful.
License exams, no. Most of Class 1A, they honestly wouldn't be able to get their hero licenses here because of all of this horror they've gone through. They could not act accordingly any longer. Those that were able to get the hero licenses, though, were only Kirishima, Ochako, Toru, Shoji, and Tokuyami. Momo was taken out of UA alongside Mina and Sato, the guy who bakes. This one happened after they were unable to get their hero licenses. The parents saw that there was no point in having their kids attend UA any longer, especially after so much had happened. Those that were able to get their hero licenses, they would end up participating in the Shihasakai raid. The League of Villains, they would have gained a lot of notoriety. They would have gained a lot of notoriety and a lot more members during this time, however, considering what ended up happening to All Might, considering the fact that one of the League's members, All For One, the head honcho, the guy working behind the scenes, finally revealed himself after all of this time and killed All Might. This was documented as well, after all. Even if it wasn't, they would have found out anyways. Unfortunately for the heroes, there would be so many more people working against them here. There were way more villains here than in canon, and the villains in canon were already giving the heroes a run for their money. The only people from Class 1A that would be available to rescue Eri
would end up being Kirishima and Tokoyami. Night Eye and Mirio would be there too, although Night Eye would end up getting stabbed through the back by Wolverine, which would shock Tokoyami and Mirio. Mirio would try to fight Yamakumo, only to lose his balance thanks to the effect of one of the quick users who could make some people feel drunk or something along those lines, feel their drunken state, lose their balance, lose their hand-to-eye coordination or something along those lines. I don't know the full details of the quake. Mirio's world would be spinning, but this world would quickly turn red though, as two sets of claws would carve through his chest, starting from the shoulders down in an X fashion. Tokoyami would try fighting Yamakumo, Wolverine, only to get pierced through the chest by Chisaki's use of his quake on the ground, which would make rock spike. Kirishima would have been stuck riding Rapper earlier on alongside Fat Gum, so he wouldn't have even known about this altercation. Chisaki would laugh at the pitiful state of the heroes and compliment Wolverine on his wake. Wolverine would just grunt in response. All for One would walk into the vicinity. He would clap as well and whistle. Good wake, guys! Real good wake. I'm proud of you all. He would walk up to Chisaki and place a hand on his shoulder. Chisaki didn't know what All For One was doing. He did not like being touched after all. He established that from early on. But All For One would say for Chisaki to relax. Then he would knock out Chisaki by using one of his quakes, which, let's just say, he has like some sort of shock quake. He has some sort of electricity quake or something along those lines, and he would grab Chisaki's face before stealing his quake and using it on himself to bring his body back to its prime. Now, well, Japan is screwed. That's all I gotta say. All For One is back to his prime. There is no All Might. All Might is dead. So, R.I.P. Japan would be taken over by All For One. All For One would have Japan at his mercy. He would be the new dictator of Japan, and he would continue to raise Izuku as his little killing machine, being as loyal as Gigantomachia. And Eri, well, she would be a second possible successor if Shigaraki didn't turn out properly. He would have Shigaraki as his first vessel, and whenever something went wrong, he would always have Eri as a backup. So yes, this is how this ends. This is what you could probably call one of the pieces of the Dark Multiverse. Shout out to Purple Heart Neptune. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please, to Purple Heart Neptune. I will leave a link to their channel in the description, because they were the ones that actually helped me come up with this idea and actually form the whole plot for this what if. Anyways, King Titan X out. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, people.